Good afternoon. Welcome to Grade 12, First Additional Language. This is the second part of our poetry exam question lessons. We're going to do poetry revision by looking at specific exam questions, how the questions are asked, and exactly how you should answer those questions in order to receive full marks. Please make sure that you have your poems as well as your notes in front of you that you can follow and make notes as I'm explaining. Today we're going to work with the following poems. That will be Midterm Break, Spring, and Captive. But before we start, I just want to give great thanks and recognition to Mrs. P.J. Stolp for the compiling of the following PowerPoints that was used in some of the previous lessons: Transactional Writing 1, Transactional Writing 2, Death, and Midterm Break. Thank you very much. Right, we're going to start again with a short summary of the poem, and then we're going to look at specific questions. Now, in Midterm Break, a boy sits in the school's medical area waiting to be given a lift home. The ringing of the school bell further enhanced the fact that he is waiting for something. When he finally arrives home, he sees his father on the porch crying. The house is packed with neighbors and strangers who offer their condolences. He notices his baby sister in a cot laughing and cooing while his mother takes his hand. She is so overcome with anger and grief that she is unable to cry. Later, the body of his younger brother arrives in an ambulance. The next morning, when the house is quiet, the boy goes up to the bedroom to see his brother for the last time. Now, as I explained in the previous lesson, your first question in poetry can be where they give you a list of words where you have to fill in the correct word, or it can be fit column A with column B, as you can see on your screen. Now, choose a description from column B taken from the poem Midterm Break that matches the poetic device in column A. So these are all about poetic devices. Right. So the first one we have is a euphemism. If we quickly remember what a euphemism is, it's when you use a mild word or a mild expression that is substituted for one considered to be too harsh or blunt when referring to something unpleasant. A euphemism, if we look in column B, we'll see number C, sorry for my trouble. Remember, instead of saying, I'm sorry about your brother's death, they simply said, sorry for my trouble. Alliteration is a repetition of a consonant. Look at number A, a 4-foot box. And then personification is when you give human characteristics to something that is not human. And look at number D, the candles soothed the bedside. Candles cannot soothe. And then a simile, as in his cot. Number B is because of the word as, obviously. Right, then why is the title not suitable for the poem? Discuss your view. Or the question can be, what is unusual about the title of this poem? I can almost guarantee if this poem is asked, a question about the title will pop up. So what is unusual, or why is it not suitable? The title Midterm Break suggests a time of happiness. Midterm break suggests it is a vacation away from school, something pleasant. But this poem deals with a time of grief. Now, the speaker is having a break in classes, but it has to deal with the death of his brother. Nothing pleasant about the break. And the word break suggests a time of rest. However, this will not be a time of rest, but a time of grieving. So you have to show the marker that you understand the concept of midterm break is usually associated with something pleasant like a holiday or a break away from classes. But in this poem, the break refers to a time that they deal with grief and with death, and the break also refers to a break in the family dynamic. Who is the speaker in this poem? Obviously, you can say the brother of the deceased or the poet. Refer to lines 1 to 3. I sat all morning in the college sick bay, counting bells, nailing classes to a close. At 2 o'clock, our neighbors drove me home. Now, where does the speaker find himself? You can either answer at boarding school or in the sick room. And then those same lines, comment on the speaker's use of the words counting bells in the context of the poem. Remember what I told you, when you see a question, please go back to the poem, read the line just before the line in question and the line after, so that you can see the whole context of the words used in that poem. Now we're working with counting bells, and that is in line 2. The first line says, I sat all morning in the college sick bay, counting bells, nailing classes to a close. At 2 o'clock, our neighbors drove me home. Now the words counting bells tells us the boy has nothing better to do, and therefore he's counting the bells ringing. It is clear that he's bored and would rather be in class. Or counting bells indicates that time passes slowly for him and that he is waiting for a long time to be picked up by the neighbors. Still line 2, counting bells, nailing classes to a close. Comment on the speaker's use of the word nailing in this context. So now nailing is not usually associated with the ringing of a school bell, but with announcing a funeral. So the reader gets the impression that something tragic has or is about to happen. Explain in your own words why the speaker remembers the precise time of certain events in lines 3 and 14. Line 3 says, at 2 o'clock, our neighbors drove me home. Line 14 says, at 10 o'clock, the ambulance arrived. Now, remembering the precise time indicates how traumatized he was at hearing the news of his brother's death and when the ambulance brought his brother's body home. So both times it is to indicate how traumatized he was. That is why he remembered the precise time. Give a reason why the neighbors and not his parents come to fetch the speaker, because in line 3, at 2 o'clock, our neighbors drove me home. Now, it can either be the speaker's parents are waiting at home for the body of his brother, or they are too emotional, or the neighbors offer their assistance because the parents are in mourning. Then refer to line 5. He had always taken funerals in his stride. Now, again, go back, read the line before and after to see the context. In the porch, line 4, I met my father crying. He had always taken funerals in his stride. So the he is his father he's talking about. And now the question, how does the father usually react to funerals? That's what he's saying, taken funerals in his stride. That means he usually deals with it calmly. He does not show that much emotion. The fact that he showed this much emotion, he's crying, shows us that the death of this person was really personal to the father. Refer to line 6 and Big Jim Evans saying it was a hard blow. Explain the literal and figurative meanings of the words hard blow in the context of the poem. Look at your screen, see how I answered it. I wrote down literal meaning and I wrote it down. I wrote down figurative meaning and I wrote it down. Be sure to show a clear difference between the two so that the marker can clearly see that you know the difference. If you are just going to write it in one long sentence, the difference won't be shown clear in your answer. So the literal meaning, it refers to the car hitting the child, the hard blow against his head quite hard. And then the figurative meaning, a hard blow refers to the child's death being an extremely tragic experience for everyone. Then we move to line 7. The baby cooed and laughed and rocked the pram. First of all, identify the figure of speech and explain how this figure of speech contrasts with the rest of the poem. So you don't only supposed to explain the meaning of the figure of speech, you must show how it is in contrast with the rest of the poem. So in this line, the baby cooed and laughed, so he was happy. And remember, in the rest of the poem, everyone is extremely sad. So first of all, identify the figure of speech is onomatopoeia, and then the baby is happy to see his brother return from school. He's ignorant of the tragic events that happened. So the baby is happy to see the return of his brother, in contrast with the rest of the family members who are sad about the tragic events. So ensure that you include the word contrast in your answer here. In what way is the father's behavior in stanza 2 and the baby's behavior in stanza 3 different? Go read it. Stanza 2, in the porch I met my father crying. Stanza 3, the baby cooed and laughed. So the father is crying and sad while the baby is laughing and happy. Right, obviously the baby is unaware of what is going on around him. He's still too small to realize. Explain in your own words why the baby's expression of joy is acceptable. As I said, the baby is too young to understand why everyone is so depressed or sad. He's the only one in the house who seems happy because of seeing his older brother returning home. Then line 8. Again, go back to your poem, read further. When I came in and I was embarrassed. Now, what happened just after that? I was embarrassed by old men standing up to shake my hand. Now, suggest a reason why the speaker is embarrassed when the old men shake his hand, because he is treated as a grown-up and not like a 14-year-old boy. Remember, in this line, we're talking about a reversal of roles. Usually, the young people would stand up and greet the old people as a sign of respect. And now it's the other way around, and that is why the speaker is feeling embarrassed. Refer to line 10. And tell me they were sorry for my trouble. Identify the tone in the old men's words and why do they use this tone. Now remember, tone is about what you hear. When they're saying, we are sorry for your trouble, it would be sympathetic, compassionate, caring, and considerate. And then the reason why they used this tone, they showed respect for the bereaved family, or they expressed their condolences to the boy for losing his younger brother. Now, look at line 13. With whom is the mother angry? Now, in line 12 at the end, it says, as my mother held my hand in hers and coughed out angry, tearless sighs. Now, why, at who, with whom is the mother angry? Now, it can be the driver of the vehicle. She can be angry at herself for not keeping a closer eye on the little boy, or on the person who was supposed to look after a child. And she can also be angry with God that he would allow something this terrible to happen. Refer to line 19, where it says, if we look at line 17, it starts already. I saw him for the first time in 6 weeks, paler now, wearing a poppy bruise on his left temple. So he's talking about his brother that has died. Now identify and explain the figure of speech in the context of the poem. Now the words context of the poem is why I took you back to the end of line 17 up until line 19, what the question is about. Now, the figure of speech here is a metaphor. He's talking about the mark on his brother's left temple on his head. So the shape and the red color of the bruise on his left temple is being compared to the shape and the color of the petals of a poppy flower. Remember, with the metaphor, we compare two things with one another and we write down what do they have in common. So the two things that are being compared is the bruise on his temple with a poppy flower because of the color and the shape of that specific bruise that is the same as the color and the shape of the petals of a poppy flower. Then why do you think line 22, a 4-foot box, a foot for every year, is written in a single line stanza? Now, when something is written in a single line, it is like repetition. It is to emphasize. In this case, it's to emphasize the tragedy of the boy dying so young, or the intensity of emotion at the loss of his brother. Discuss how the theme of mourning is evident in this poem. Remember, your themes at all times are so very important. So we're talking about the theme of mourning. The poem shows how death affects neighbors, friends, and family during a time of mourning. Neighbors and friends, like Big Jim Evans, show sympathy by visiting the family to express condolences using euphemisms like sorry for your trouble. Remember what I told you about a question like this? Make your point, explain it, and give an example from the text, from the poem. Very important. They whisper as a sign of respect where death has occurred, and the father mourns the death of his child by crying and showing emotion which he usually does not do. Then do you agree that the speaker seems to be detached when relating the event of his brother's death? Substantiate your answer. Now, the word detached means to remove himself, to not be involved. Okay, and remember, with a question, you have a yes and no answer. You are allowed to give a combination answer. Just make sure your motivation fit with your yes and the other way around with your no. If you said yes, the speaker seems to be detached, your motivation can be the speaker as a first-person account of the experience. Experience does seem to be detached from the tragic event. Do you see what I did there? I gave my opinion. I immediately said, yes, he seemed to be detached, so that the marker can see clearly what is your point of view. And then I give my motivation and my explanation and my example. He does not shed a tear like his father, nor does he appear severely grief-stricken like his mother. He does not seem to have come to grips with the death of his younger brother. Or you can answer no. He relates to the unfolding events from the point of view of a 14-year-old. It is his first experience of such a tragic loss. It seems that he focuses more on the reaction of his parents. He gives a literal description of the event, but that does not mean that he's not affected emotionally. A similar question to that, the speaker shows no emotion about his brother's death. Discuss your view. It appears as if he is detached. The event and what he witnesses are related more from an observant point of view than his own experience. He uses words like corpse and I saw him and going up into the room, but nowhere does he refer to my brother. He sees his father crying, but he does not show any emotion. He focuses on the reaction of the neighbors and his parents, but does not describe his own emotions. If you said no, the speaker is still very young and does not fully grasp the reality of the situation. It is perhaps his first experience with death of a close family member. He does not know how to deal with the trauma as he is suddenly treated like an adult by the neighbors. The shock of seeing his father crying, and the death of his brother might be too overwhelming. Therefore, he does not know how to react. Remember, again, you are allowed to give a combination answer. We move over to the next poem, which is Spring. And again, first of all, a short summary. Our speaker declares that nothing is as beautiful as spring. He goes on to give us images of the season's lushness in weeds and birds, eggs, and a bird's song. The speaker describes the effect of the bird song as being extremely powerful and cleansing. We see lambs racing about a blue sky and agree growing leaves and blossoms. And then he wonders what's up with all this life and joy, and compares the beauty and innocence of spring to the biblical Garden of Eden. Suddenly, the speaker addresses God to ask him to protect innocent minds from the sin that seems inevitable. As you know, spring is also a sonnet, but it is not the same type as Sonnet 18, and we'll have a look at that now. Your first question here, this is where they do not give you a line of words, a list of words to choose from. You must know the words to fill in the gaps. Where the red words are filled in, it were only gaps. So this poem is an example of a Petrarchan or Italian sonnet, as it consists of an octave of 8 lines and a sestet of 6 lines. Again, they can ask it in the way, comment critically on the structure of the poem or describe the structure of the poem fully. And then for 4 marks, you have to write it down just like you did with Sonnet 18. This, however, is an Italian or Petrarchan sonnet consisting of 14 lines. It consists of an octave of 8 lines with a sestet of 6 lines. And please make sure you put that in the correct order in the poem. The octave comes first and then the sestet, and then write out the rhyme scheme in full. Right, we're working with line 1. Nothing is so beautiful as spring. Name and explain the function of the punctuation mark used in line 1. First of all, name it. It is a dash. And then the function, it indicates that an explanation of why he says nothing is as beautiful as spring is about to follow. So in line 1, he makes a statement where he says nothing is so beautiful as spring, puts the dash to show us that an explanation will follow. Using your own words, state how the speaker feels about spring. Remember, unless asked to quote, always use your own words when answering literature questions. How does the speaker feel about spring? The speaker feels that spring is the best or the loveliest season. Then, why is the speaker's description of weeds, that is in line 2, when weeds in wheels shoot long and lovely and lush, why is that description unusual? Now, weeds are parasites. It is something you do not want in your garden. It is unwanted. Okay, you do everything in your power to get rid of those weeds. So it's generally not viewed in a positive light. But, or however, the poet describes the weeds in line 2 as lovely and lush, which are terms of admiration. Refer to lines 2 to 5. Thrush's eggs look little low heavens, and thrush through the echoing timber does so rinse and ring the ear. It strikes like lightnings to hear him sing. Now identify and explain the figure of speech in these lines. If you look like at the last part, it strikes like lightnings. Now that is obviously the word like tells us it's a simile, and you are explaining the sound of the thrush's song is compared to lightning that strikes. Those are the two things that are being compared. The simile emphasizes that the sound is striking or powerful. The listener can clearly hear the beauty of the season, spring. Or there is an implied simile. If we look at the first part, the color of the eggs is compared to the sky. So the bird's eggs are compared to the heavens because it has the same blue color. Then give one word for the speaker's tone in this line. So the word heavens introduces a religious tone, or you can say amazement. Refer to line 4. Through the echoing timber does so rinse and ring. Explain in your own words why the timber is described as echoing. Now we all know he's talking about the thrush's song or the bird's song that is echoing through the woods. The timber is the woods and the song is echoing through the woods. Now is the underlined word in line 6. Brush meant literally or figuratively. Give a reason for your answer. Go back to your poem. Read the line before and after. So it's in line 6 where it says, they brush, line 7, the descending blue. So it is meant figuratively because it is personification. The leaves look like they are painting, brushing the blue of the sky. Now, using your own words, explain the question that the speaker is asking in line 9. What is all this juice and all this joy? So, own words, the speaker is wondering how to explain or get a handle on all the joys and growth of spring, or what to make of all this overflowing of life. Or he wonders about the growth of things in spring. What does it signify? Remember, use your own words. Give one word for the speaker's tone in line 11 and 12, where he says, have, get, before it cloy, before it cloud, Christ Lord, and sour with sinning. Again, if you are asked to write down only one word, write down only one word. That's the first word they will mark. If you write more than one word, we will only mark the first word that you write down. So the tone again is about what you hear. It's anguish, urgency, pleading, or anxious. Then we're still in line 11. Explain why the speaker refers to the Garden of Eden in line 11. Now he refers to that because the beauty or fruitfulness of spring is compared to the beauty of the Garden of Eden. Or you can say spring is beautiful and pure because everything is new, just like in the Garden of Eden. Then again with the themes, remember I told you how important it is to know all the themes from all your poems. Discuss the theme of religion that is evident in this poem. So we're going to concentrate on religion. And then from the sestet, the poem turns into a prayer where the speaker speaks directly to God, which is also an example of apostrophe. Remember, apostrophe is a figure of speech in which a speaker directly addresses an absent or dead person or an abstract quality or something non-human as if it were present and capable of responding. That's when he speaks directly to God. Nature reminds the speaker of the power of God, and there are several references to religious symbols like the lambs and Garden of Eden, the theme of religion. Has the speaker convinced you that nothing is as beautiful as spring? In line 1, substantiate your answer. Remember, you are allowed to give a combination answer. If you said yes, spring is the time of year when man moves closest to nature and God. When we see the beauty of spring, which suggests renewal, we are renewed by God. and during spring everything seems beautiful. Even weeds are described as beautiful. So I made my point, I explained it, and I gave examples and linked it back to my question. Or you could have said, no, the power of God is not only seen in spring, but is evident in all the seasons, and each season has its own beauty. And the images used may be too difficult for all the readers to understand and will therefore not be convinced that spring is the most beautiful season. We move over to our next poem, which is Captive. Again, we have a short summary of what the poem is about. We can assume that he is a migrant laborer, a casual and unskilled worker who moves from one area to another, offering their services on a temporary, usually seasonal basis. They take on menial and backbreaking work with little rest and get paid a minimal wage. This poem highlights the injustice of mine laborers. They are worked to death. Now, again, your first question, you are given a list of words and you have to put it in the correct open spaces. So the poem is written in the form of a monologue where the two main themes are freedom versus captivity and the effects of migration. The speaker is a migrant mine worker who has become ill and is unable to return home. That's the first one. The second one, in this poem, the speaker is putting himself in the shoes of a migrant worker. In this poem, the beginning and closing lines reflect the reality of the speaker's present time. Remember, in the beginning of the poem, he tells us he feels trapped in his hospital bed, he is sick. And then in the middle, he escapes that trapped feeling by using his imagination, by going back into the past, thinking about his home and the things happening there. And in the last two lines, we see he's still back. He remembers, I'm still trapped. He's back in his present time. He feels trapped because of his illness and uses his imagination to escape from reality. Now, what is being compared in lines 1 to 4? Now, lines 1 to 4 says, as a wild bird caught in a slip-knot snare, the plaited tail hairs of a dun-colored cow, almost invisible, so tethered in the toils of fever, do I lie. So what is being compared? He is saying just as a bird is trapped by a slip-knot snare. Now that's a small bird trap. So too does he, the speaker, feel trapped by the fever that he has. Now refer to line 4. So tethered in the toils of fever do I lie. Explain in your own words why this metaphor is effective in the context of the poem. So they give you a figure of speech, which is a metaphor, and they ask you to explain why is it effective in the context of the poem. So what did I tell you? Go back, read the lines before and after. Remember, he feels tied down by his fever, as someone would feel as if he was tied down with ropes, right? And then quote 2 consecutive words. Remember, consecutive means following each other continuously, and only 2 words, because that is what they are asking of you, to prove that the flies inside the hospital room is a symbol of captivity. And if you look at line 6, it says, of flies that flutter vainly. So those 2 words, flutter vainly. Remember, why is it a symbol of captivity? The flies see the outside. They see freedom. And they fly into that glass window. So the glass window is deceiving them, promising them outside freedom, but they can never get there. Okay, that is the next question. Explain why the window panes are described as deceiving in line 7, where it says they flutter vainly against cold, hard, deceiving window panes. So the clear glass of the window panes appears as if the flies can fly through. So they see the outside, they see freedom. But this is deceptive as the barrier of the glass prevents them from doing so. Now refer to line 9 to 10. To my home that shines in a valley afar, my home, brightest tooth in the jaws of distance. Now, what is the function of the repetition in these two lines? The words that are being repeated is my home. So the repetition of my home emphasize. Remember, when something is repeated, it is to emphasize. Emphasize the speaker's desperate longing for his home. Home represents a place where he is comfortable and where he belongs. So it's to emphasize his desperate longing for his home. Refer to line 13. Their lazy shadows drink the sunlight. Identify the figure of speech first of all. Can a shadow drink? No, it's personification where we give human characteristics to something that's not human. That's our first part. We identify its personification, and now we must explain why this figure of speech is appropriate. So the personification of the shadows shows the stillness of the cows and the peacefulness of the atmosphere. The slow movement of the cows as they are grazing blocks the sunlight as if it is being swallowed, drinking it in. Or you could have said the personification is extended to the idea of the shadows drinking the sunlight, referring to the shadows absorbing the sunlight. That is most probably the easier answer to use, the shadows that are absorbing the sunlight. Refer to stanza 2. Name 2 things that the herd boys are doing at that specific time. And if you look at line 19, it says, there, now, shouting, happy herd boys, while they watch the cattle browse, are busy molding mimic cattle. So they are shouting with joy, they are watching the cattle, and they are creating toy cattle from clay. We move over to line 23. There where the sun has folded his wings that dazzle. Identify the figure of speech and explain in your own words why the poet makes use of this figure of speech. Now, first of all, it's a metaphor. The setting sun is compared to a bird folding its wings as it is settling down in its nest. Beware. I've seen a lot of answer where a candidate would answer that is personification. Now, it's not a human characteristic that is given here to the sun. The sun is compared to a bird that folds its wings. Still in that line, there where the sun, to what does there in this line refer? It is obviously his home, Alice in the Eastern Cape, the home of the mine laborer, the rural area from which the miner comes, or his rural home. Then in stanza 3, name 2 types of stories that were related by the elders around the campfires. In stanza 3, I refer you to line 27. And greybeards shall tell stories of ancient battles and cattle races of days of old, of hunters bold and fearless. So stories of ancient battles, stories of cattle races, and stories of hunters, any 2 of those. Identify the speaker's tone in line 31 and 32. But here I burn and shiver and listen to the buzzing of flies against deceiving window panes. Remember, I told you in the beginning of the poem, he is describing what he is doing. He's lying in bed as someone would feel trapped by his fever. He cannot escape. And then he escapes in the middle of the poem by thinking back about his home. And then in line 31 and 32, but yeah, I burn and shiver. So the tone, what do you hear? You hear sadness, frustration, regret, and hopelessness. Then again, a question of theme, so very important. Discuss how the theme of captivity is evident in this poem. The speaker draws an analogy between himself and a bird that is trapped in a snare to illustrate that he is held captive by his illness or his fever, which confines him to his bed and to the walls of the hospital. The speaker feels trapped by the fact that he's in a city and is unable to experience the freedom of life in the rural area. The idea of deceiving window panes is repeated to emphasize the feeling of captivity that he experiences. The windows allow him a view of freedom which he cannot experience at this point in time or maybe ever. Then consider the poem as a whole. Do you feel sorry for the speaker? Again, if it's a yes and no answer, you may say yes and no as a combination answer. See that your motivation fits with your answer, or you can either just say yes or just no. So if you said yes, you feel sorry for the speaker. The speaker was forced by circumstances to move away from home to find work on the mine and in that way provide for his family. He became ill and felt trapped in the hospital and had to face the possibility of perhaps never being able to return home. All that he has left is his memories of his home. If you said, no, I do not feel sorry for the speaker. Everyone must work to provide for themselves or their families. He was lucky enough to find a job in the city. When he became ill, there was a hospital where he could seek treatment. He still has his memories of his home and his people to help him cope with his circumstances. Discuss the suitability of the title of the poem, Captive. Now, themes and title, those two things are very, very important for you to study and to remember. This case, the title of the poem, Captive. The title describes the trapped feeling the miner is experiencing like a prisoner unable to escape. Being held captive would mean that a person is unable to move or to act freely. You are forced to do or be somewhere where you do not want to be. In this poem, the title refers to the speaker feeling trapped as a result of his illness, as well as the fact that he has no choice but to work on a mine far from home. Right, if we just have a quick look at questions that were frequently asked, as we have seen in the past two lessons. We have seen a lot of questions about themes, so it's extremely important that you know all the information about themes for all your poems. The tone, there will always be questions on tone, and remember, tone is about what you hear. You must make sure that you know all the figures of speech included in all of the poems. Know the title. Is the title appropriate? What is unusual about the title? Know all of that information about the poem. And then remember with your open-ended questions. Make a point. Explain that point. So very important, give an example and then link to the question. If you're only going to make a point and not give an example from the poem or from the text, it's just a generic answer and you cannot get marks for that. I truly hope that you all enjoyed the lessons and that it helped you a little bit. Have a great afternoon further. Make wise choices. Goodbye.